Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Handcuff and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 15 waiver wire targets for the 2023 fantasy football season. Now, first and foremost, if you're watching this video, congratulations. You have made it to the fantasy football playoffs, and you're one step closer to capturing a 2023 fantasy football championship. Now, in many of our circumstances, based on the events that took place yesterday, Sunday of Week 14, we're dealing with a lot of injuries. I mean, we're talking about players like CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Josh Jacobs, Justin Jefferson, Justin Herbert, Alexander Madison, that all got injured and could all potentially miss time. Not only that, we're talking about players from Week 14 in which like Geno Smith and Isaiah Pacheco didn't even play. So we're going to be talking about players at a variety of different positions: quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, kickers, and defenses. Players that not only can help you capture a victory in Week 15, but hopefully can help you for the remainder of the season in order to capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. Now, before I get into talking about these individual players at the variety of different positions, let me remind you guys, at the end of today's video, I'll be putting together a couple pick'em slips via Underdog Fantasy. Again, for those of you guys who want my up-to-date rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season, and for the next 2 weekends, every single Saturday morning that are taking place in the upcoming weekends. This Saturday, Week 15, there are 3 games taking place. So for those of you who are trying to stay up to date on my latest rankings, be sure to travel down to the description of the video and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you use code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10. Not only are you going to get the first-time deposit match up to $100, you'll get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning. But specifically for the next 2 Saturdays, I'll be sending them to you as well on Saturday morning because there are games implicated there. So we want to make sure that our rosters are ready to go in order to succeed and, of course, get one step closer to capturing a 2023 fantasy football championship. These rankings are by position, by tier, flex rankings, half PPR, and full PPR. For those of you wondering if you're eligible of taking advantage of the opportunity of helping me help you for the remainder of the season, check out the map to the right side of the screen. And if you sign up before tonight's game between the Miami Dolphins and, of course, Tennessee Titans, you can take advantage of Tua Tagovailoa, 0.5 total yards. Again, I'll be putting together a couple pick'em slips at the end of today's episode. Thank you very much. All right, so let's talk about running backs going into Week 15 in regards to waiver wire. First and foremost, we want to begin by talking about Ty Chandler of the Minnesota Vikings. Yesterday in the third quarter, Alexander Madison, the primary starting running back of the Minnesota Vikings, went down with an ankle injury. Now, that ankle injury forced him out of the game and he did not return. The assumption is that it is a high ankle sprain. Like we have seen over the course of this entire season, typically a high ankle sprain is going to leave you out for 3 to 4 weeks. So if that's going to be the case, in terms of the fantasy football playoffs, Ty Chandler would be the starting running back of the Minnesota Vikings going forward. This upcoming week, they take on the Cincinnati Bengals. It is an advantageous matchup. The following week, it is against the Detroit Lions, the division rival. A tough matchup, but then the following week after that, Championship Sunday against the Green Bay Packers, another advantageous matchup. Considering the likelihood of Alexander Madison missing the next 3 weeks, I believe that Ty Chandler should be the first running back that is addressed. He's coming off of a Sunday in which he had 15 total touches. I understand that the offense had to make a quarterback switch, but going forward, they're going to have to run the ball, especially if, in fact, they're not going to be starting Josh Dobbs. And of course, if they're not going to have Justin Jefferson available, considering he's dealing with a rib injury. Either way, as of this current moment in time, Ty Chandler's only rostered in 22% of Yahoo leagues, 29% of sleeper leagues. Hopefully is available for you to pick up so that you can potentially fill in for the absence of Alexander Madison or potentially any other running backs that you have missing. Now, when we move on to number 2 and 3, we bring up Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jerick McKinnon. Now, for those of you who have been living under a rock and did not potentially pick up these 2 players in the absence of Isaiah Pacheco yesterday, and if they're somehow still available in your league, you have an opportunity of picking them up. As of this current moment in time, Clyde Edwards-Helaire rostered in 50% of Yahoo leagues, 53% of sleeper leagues. Jerick McKinnon, 41% of Yahoo leagues, 50% of sleeper leagues. So as it currently stands, if these 2 players are available and Isaiah Pacheco, who is dealing with a shoulder injury, is going to miss another week or potentially an even greater stint of time, potentially be placed on the injured reserve, Clyde Edwards-Helaire would be the first and foremost running back that I would want to have on roster, primarily because he's going to get the vast majority of rushing attempts and he's also going to get himself utilization through the air. Now, unfortunately, yesterday, Jerick McKinnon did steal the goal line rushing attempt, but this kind of stuff just happens at the running back position. You look at last night's Sunday Night Football game, Tony Pollard, unfortunately, gets his rushing touchdown stolen within the given week, goes in the direction of Rico Dowdle, the backup running back. Either way, just wanted to go ahead and mention both these running backs have immense value going forward, especially in the absence of Isaiah Pacheco. They provided that yesterday, and continuing on, especially against the New England Patriots this week, they will be of immense value. Moving on to our number 4, we have Zamir White. Yesterday, the assumption was that Josh Jacobs hyperextended his knee. Now, if in fact he is going to miss any sort of time, Zamir White would be the primary running back in terms of rushing attempts going forward. Now, the primary issue going into Week 15 is the fact that the Las Vegas Raiders take on the Los Angeles Chargers on Thursday Night Football. So if in fact Josh Jacobs, dealing with that knee injury, is not going to be prepared, make sure to pick up his handcuff, Zamir White, going into the matchup. So if in fact he is not available, you have a pivoting option in order to start Zamir White within an advantageous matchup. Moving on to our number 5, we have Foreman. For another consecutive week, he has demonstrated that he is clearing away the RB1 within this overall offense. 11 rushing attempts, 2 receptions on 3 total targets, had a vast majority of the overall touches in comparison to guys like Khalil Herbert and of course Roschon Johnson. Foreman only rostered in 38% of Yahoo leagues, 39% of sleeper leagues, could be a value going forward. I understand this upcoming weekend's matchup against the Cleveland Browns isn't the most advantageous, but I do believe that the Cleveland Browns, if you're going to find success against them, especially in regards to the Chicago Bears offense, it's going to be running the ball and being able to find yardage on the ground via Foreman. So I think he's a solid play going into this week as a top 36 option. The final player I wanted to mention at the running back position, and more of a PSA, is pick up your handcuffs. Chase Brown is the handcuff of Joe Mixon, and luckily he was able to score himself a touchdown in the receiving game. But going forward, you want to pick up guys like a Chase Brown, a Rico Dowdle, a Jordan Mason, players that are associated with our blue chip running backs, associated with Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard, Christian McCaffrey, etc. Just looking at some of the other players that we're mentioning today, our number 1, Ty Chandler, is the handcuff of Alexander Mattison. Zamir White is the handcuff of Josh Jacobs. If you have space on your bench, be sure to pick up your blue chip players' handcuffs going forward, because it certainly will make a difference in the long run, just in case an injury is to, of course, pop up throughout the fantasy playoffs. And if you don't have enough fab or potentially a high enough priority within your overall waiver system, you might go ahead and lose yourself a week based on the fact that you don't have this handcuff available on roster in order to fill in case of an injury. All right, with that all covered, let's move on to the wide receiver conversation, beginning with our number 1, Odell Beckham Jr., currently only rostered in 41% of Yahoo leagues, 50% of sleeper leagues. I've mentioned Odell Beckham Jr. for probably the last 2 months straight. Just looking at what he was able to produce from weeks 1 through 6 of earlier this season, he was averaging 3.87 fantasy points per game. From weeks 9 through 14, this guy's been averaging 11.76 half PPR fantasy points per game. He has scored double-digit fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games he has participated in. He's coming off a performance in which he had double-digit targets, scored a touchdown, scored 17.7 fantasy points. Now, even though yesterday was presumed to have been a rain game, when we were live streaming yesterday morning, it looked like it wasn't going to rain. And that's exactly kind of where we trended towards. This was a pass-heavy game by both teams, and they both succeeded luckily, and the fantasy gods smiled upon us yesterday. Going forward, especially in the matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, one of the most advantageous matchups at the wide receiver position, on top of the fact that, Zay Flowers played well yesterday, Isaiah Likely played well. If they could all coexist going forward, it's going to make it that much easier for us to trust them as fantasy prospects within this offense. Our number 2 is Noah Brown. As I mentioned earlier, besides the fact that CJ Stroud is in concussion protocol, Nico Collins yesterday went down with a calf strain. Unfortunately, he was dealing with this injury just a couple weeks back. Now that he's re-aggravated this injury, there could be an even extended amount of time in which Nico Collins is going to miss. So besides Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and of course Dalton Schultz all dealing with injuries right now, Noah Brown really is the next man up. He's currently rostered in 49% of Yahoo leagues, 54% of sleeper leagues. If he's available in your league and CJ Stroud is available to play this week, could be a solid, overall play. They do play against the Tennessee Titans. So even if Davis Mills is the outright starting quarterback going into this week, we have seen Davis Mills put up great performances in the past, and he could elevate Noah Brown to being a solid top 40 wide receiver option within the given week, as he's the only person that he'll be targeting within this offense, considering, honestly, nobody else is healthy. Moving on, let's talk about our number 3, Zay Jones. He's coming off a performance in which he had 14 total targets. Now, that is a ridiculously high volume. Only had 5 receptions for 29 yards, though. Now, obviously, a lot of those overall opportunities were 10 yards over his head in the arms of a defender. Trevor Lawrence didn't look, the healthiest, and obviously wasn't making the best decisions in terms of some of the passes sent in the direction of Zay Jones. But in comparison, Calvin Ridley had 13 targets. He didn't have a great game either. Both of them were given a high volume of opportunity, but those opportunities quite inaccurate over the course of the game. But going forward, if in fact we can see Trevor Lawrence get healthy over the course of this week, they play on Sunday Night Football against the Baltimore Ravens. We just saw the Los Angeles Rams tear them apart in terms of the passing game. Matthew Stafford with 3 passing touchdowns. I'm hoping we can see a solid performance going forward within this offense, especially in the absence of Christian Kirk. Really, the only premier receiving threat within this offense over the course of the last couple weeks here has been Evan Ingram. Either way, he's currently rostered in 29% of Yahoo leagues, 43% of sleeper leagues. Should be a solid option going forward. Our number 4 is Curtis Samuel, coming off of the bye week. The reason why I wanted to mention Curtis Samuel is because in the last 2 games in which he's participated, 17 total targets. That's the most amongst all wide receivers in the last 2 games within the Washington Commanders offense. The last 2 games consisting of 9 catches, 100 receiving yards, 4 catches, 65 receiving yards. He'll continue to always be a red zone receiving threat within this offense. And considering they're taking on the LA Rams this week, I would assume that this is going to be a negative game script for the Washington Commanders offense and a lot of passing in the direction of Curtis Samuel from Sam Howell. The number 5 wide receiver I wanted to talk about is Demario Douglas. He's missed each of the last 2 weeks, obviously because of the concussion protocol. Once he is out of the protocol and cleared, he's currently only rostered in 20% of Yahoo leagues, 32% of sleeper leagues. He is a player that I've mentioned over the course of the last 2 months in regards to being the number 1 receiving option of the New England Patriots offense. Going into Thursday's game of last week, of course, the New England Patriots only had 3 healthy wide receivers. They had Jalen Reagor, they had Juju Smith-Schuster, and they had Tyquan Thornton. Outside of those 3, there were no healthy options, and Bailey Zappi needs to throw the ball to somebody. Going forward, if Demario Douglas is healthy, he is going to be a top 40 option at the wide receiver position, especially in a full PPR scoring format, considering this New England Patriots offense is going to be in a negative game script for majority of the overall quarters that they play for the remainder of the season, and they'll be throwing the ball in the direction of Demario Douglas on a consistent basis. Moving on to our number 6, the final wide receiver I wanted to mention, Michael Wilson. He is returning from injury, and he is technically going to be the number 2 wide receiver of this Arizona Cardinals offense. That being said, he is still going to be the number 4 option within this offense as a whole, behind Trey McBride, Marquise Hollywood Brown, and James Conner. But still, over the course of the last couple weeks, we have seen that Kyler Murray can support multiple wide receivers within a given week. And considering their upcoming matchups are going to be negative game scripts, they should be throwing for the entirety of those contests. Moving on to the tight end and quarterback conversations, let's begin by talking about the top 3 tight ends. First and foremost, let's talk about Isaiah Likely, currently rostered in over 50% of leagues. Hopefully, he's already rostered because you have listened to the advice over the course of the last couple weeks. If he is not already rostered, please do yourself a favor, pick him up. Coming off a performance in which he had 5 receptions on 7 targets, 83 yards and a touchdown, 16.8 fantasy points. He takes on the Jacksonville Jaguars this upcoming Sunday. The Jacksonville Jaguars just gave up a performance of 24 fantasy points to David Njoku, 6 catches, 91 and 2 touchdowns. We would assume that Isaiah Likely could continue in that trend. Tyler Conklin's our number 2, currently only rostered in 19% of Yahoo leagues. He's a player that is greatly benefiting from the presence of Zach Wilson. So luckily yesterday, Zach Wilson played well and is going to continue to be the starter of this offense going forward. Tyler Conklin's coming off the game, 4 catches, 57 yards, 7.7 fantasy points. He's been able to surpass 4 receptions and 57 yards in 5 of the last 6 games he has played with Zach Wilson, where Zach Wilson's the starter from the beginning to the end of the game. That is very promising and going forward should continue to have value. The final player I wanted to mention in regards to tight ends is Hunter Henry. I don't know if I can trust starting him in my fantasy football playoffs, especially at the tight end position. But if you're in a spot in which you're, of course, dealing with a lot of tight end injuries or inconsistent play at the position, he's an available option. Coming off a week in which he had 2 receiving touchdowns on 3 total receptions, I don't really trust it, but technically is the next best available after those 2. Let's talk about quarterbacks. If somehow, some way, Matthew Stafford, who is currently rostered in 56% of Yahoo leagues, 53% of sleeper leagues, is somehow available, taking on the Washington Commanders is one of the easiest matchups at the position for quarterbacks and a top 3 matchup at the wide receiver position. Therefore, we would assume that Matthew Stafford has himself an incredible performance, especially considering over the course of the last 3 games, he has scored 10 passing touchdowns. My assumption going forward is that Matthew Stafford is going to continue his consistency, continue to play well, and lead this Los Angeles Rams team to the playoffs. Our number 2 is Jake Browning. Speaking of consistency, over the course of the last 2 games, he's averaging 315 passing yards per game. He has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 2 games and 1 rushing touchdown in each of those games. I mean, once again, he's looking like Joe Burrow out there. I mean, the closest thing between Jake Browning and Joe Burrow is their initials, but that's good enough for me to start him on a consistent basis, especially going up against the Minnesota Vikings this upcoming week, especially if the Minnesota Vikings are starting Nick Mullins and they cannot move the ball as an offense. It's only going to open up more opportunity for the Cincinnati Bengals to tear apart that defense. Moving on to the final quarterback I wanted to mention, Joe Flacco, coming off of back-to-back weeks of 20-plus fantasy points, coming off a performance of 311 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 20.34 fantasy points. Overall, a fantastic performance. I mean, over the course of the last 2 games, he has had himself 44 and 45 passing attempts. When you look at all of the quarterback play of the Cleveland Browns this season, whether it has been DTR, Deshaun Watson, or PJ Walker, over the course of the last 2 games, that is the most attempts a quarterback has had within the Cleveland Browns offense all season long. They never allowed, a guy like Deshaun Watson or PJ Walker to throw the ball at this volume. Joe Flacco is changing the offense. They're a pass-heavy team, and he's finding a lot of success in that. 7% rostered in Yahoo, 9% rostered on Sleeper, should be picked up, especially for those of you who are dealing with the injuries of Justin Herbert, of course, Joshua Dobbs getting benched, and CJ Stroud in the concussion protocol. The final players that I wanted to mention are kickers and defenses. Beginning with kickers, our number one is Cairo Santos of the Chicago Bears taking on the Cleveland Browns. He's currently rostered in 3% of Yahoo leagues. In the last 4 games, his fantasy point totals consist of 12, 17, 14, and 11. Number one option going forward. The number 2 is Nick Folk, currently rostered in 18% of leagues. He takes on the Houston Texans. If in fact the Houston Texans offense is going to be depleted and Davis Mills is going to be the starting quarterback going into this upcoming weekend's game, my assumption would be that we'll be in a position in which Nick Folk would be scoring a lot of points on the opposite side of the field, considering a lot of short field opportunities with Davis Mills and that offense not finding much success. The final kicker that I wanted to mention, well, first and foremost, the Los Angeles Rams are in a little bit of a tricky situation in terms of their kicking options, primarily because they just signed Mason Crosby and added him to the practice squad. So maybe if Mason Crosby is elevated and immediately the starter going forward, that could be a conversation. Otherwise, this kicker for the Los Angeles Rams over the course of the last 2 games, 11 points and 13 points. We'll have to wait and see what the deal is for Mason Crosby, but going forward, not a bad option, especially when we consider how well the Los Angeles Rams have played as of late and the fact that they take on the Washington Commanders in Week 15. Moving on to defenses, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. They take on the Carolina Panthers. The defenses against the Carolina Panthers over the course of the last month and a half have scored 26, 7, 21, 10, 7, and 21 fantasy points. 21 fantasy points most recently coming from the New Orleans Saints against this defense. I'm firing up the Atlanta Falcons against any Bryce Young offense. Moving on to the Los Angeles Rams, currently rostered in 17% of Yahoo leagues, taking on the Washington Commanders. The last 3 team defenses against the Washington Commanders, 23, 16, and 12 fantasy points. The final defense I wanted to mention is the Las Vegas Raiders. They held the Minnesota Vikings to 3 points. They had themselves 12 fantasy points yesterday, and this week on Thursday Night Football, take on Easton Stick as the starting quarterback of the Los Angeles Chargers on Thursday night. I would assume that this defense can continue to play well and have themselves a great overall performance. All right, that covers it in regards to Week 15 waiver wire targets. Before we close out today's video, let's go ahead and put together a couple pick'em slips for tonight's games between, of course, the Tennessee Titans, Miami Dolphins, Green Bay Packers, and New York Giants. Let's check that out right now. So going into tonight's game, there are 2 plays that I like and I'm going to first and foremost suggest. First and foremost, we begin with Devon Achane anytime touchdown. I do believe he'll be able to score a touchdown considering how well the Dolphins offense plays, especially against bad defenses, which the Tennessee Titans are, unfortunately, this season. I expect Devon Achane, whether it's in the first half or the second half of this game, to fall into the end zone. Another player that I like in the follow-up to this overall suggestion in terms of a overall pick-em play is Romeo Douglas being able to surpass 44.5 receiving yards. That number has gone up a couple yards in just the last 20 minutes. I would go ahead and put that in within an overall pick-em slip before tonight's game. That is my primary suggestion there. Now, another play that you could potentially take going into tonight could even be Romeo Doubs surpassing 0.5 total rushing receiving yards. The reason why I wanted to make this suggestion first and foremost is because in the games thus far this season, there's been 8 of them in which Romeo Doubs has been targeted 5 or more times. He has scored 7 touchdowns in those 8 games. I would assume that a Romeo Doubs could find himself in the end zone, and considering there's a 1.75x potential here, that could be a play in which you could go ahead put together. But other plays that I like going into tonight, I like A.J. Dillon being able to surpass his rushing yard total. That's another one that I like. There are other plays, for example, like a Tyreek Hill finding himself in the end zone. Unfortunately, they don't have it available here. But Tyreek Hill, amongst all wide receivers, leads the National Football League in terms of total, touchdown scored, and leads the National Football League in terms of plus 100-yard games. Unfortunately, they have it at 108. I'm going to stay away from that from tonight. I think Jalen Waddle could be someone that over 66.5 receiving yards is very achievable, especially against the secondary of the Tennessee Titans. But once again, I want to mention Devon Achane anytime touchdown, Romeo Doubs receiving yards. Those are the 2 plays that I'm suggesting going into tonight. Put together a couple pick'em slips for yourself via Underdog Fantasy. Check out the link down in the description. Sign up using code Andrew. Make that first-time deposit minimum of $10 to get the first-time deposit match. So if you deposit 10, you get 10. If you deposit 100, you get 100. Check that out. Put together a couple pick'em slips and enjoy tonight's games. I'll be back tomorrow with running back rankings for Week 15. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.